at the beginning of our closing ceremonies, which will take some time today. Excellencies, honorable speakers, honorable guests, professors, dear students, dear friends, it is my pleasure that I welcome all of you here today at the second Natolin graduation debate. The subject, the theme of this year's debate, the future of the Eastern Partnership, was carefully chosen. Just last month in May, we marked the 10th anniversary of the Prague summit, during which the European Union and the 6 partner countries in the EU's Eastern neighborhood inaugurated the Eastern Partnership as a joint policy initiative. We are very honored to host this debate between Minister Gela Bezhuashvili, former Foreign Minister and former Defense Minister of Georgia, Minister Borys Tarasyuk, twice a Foreign Minister and 3 times Chairman of the European Integration Committee of Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, and Mr. Radosław Sikorski, former Defense Minister, former Speaker of the Parliament, and former Foreign Minister of Poland. In this last capacity, he was also, together with his Swedish counterpart, Mr. Carl Bildt, an architect of the Eastern Partnership. I would like to extend my warmest thanks to you, ministers, for agreeing to be here with us today. I am very happy to say that the debate will be moderated today by Dr. Olaf Osica, our professor at the college, an excellent expert, and a former director of highly renowned Warsaw-based Center for Eastern Studies. It seems logical that debates on the Eastern Partnership should take place here at the College of Europe in Natolin, a place that is known for its interdisciplinary approach to the study of European integration in general, and a place which specializes in European neighborhood policies and strategies. But here in Natolin, we also implement the Eastern Partnership in practice in its inter-societal exchanges dimension. Since 2009, we have been hosting almost 200 students from all 6 Eastern Partnership countries. The timing of this debate coincides with assessments of the Eastern Partnership and reflections about its future. Who better to address these issues than our high-level guests, who had an opportunity to observe the partnership up close over the years, in different capacities and from different perspectives. I would like to turn towards our distinguished guests and thank them once again for having accepted our invitation to come to Natolin. We are truly honored to have you with us today. And now, without any further ado, I now wish all of us an interesting and thought-provoking debate, and I hand the floor over to you, Olaf. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Rector. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and especially to run a panel with such an excellent people sitting next to me, foreign ministers, who were not only present at the days when the Eastern Partnership was launched, but actually they have a lot to say about the last 10 years, because when we were chatting just before this session started about the history, 2009, the year May 2009, the year when the Eastern Partnership was established, it seems like yesterday to me, and I guess like yesterday to all our ministers, but I guess for many students, 10 years ago, you probably did other things than thinking about the international politics, and especially Eastern Partnership. So we decided to start not with the Eastern Partnership, but to have a sort of a tour for history, the last 10 years, and the question is, then and now, 2009, 2019, what has changed over the last 10 years when we've been 10 years ago? Ukraine, Georgia, also Poland, European Union and its relations with Eastern neighbors. and when we are now. And if I may start with Minister Sikorski, if you could give us your take on the last 10 years, what have we learned over the past decade? What has changed, what has not in international politics?
Well, I think with hindsight, 2008 was the high point of Atlanticism. It was in the confrontation in Georgia that Russia tested our commitment to expand, and they won, we lost. I think it's also important to remember the context in which Eastern Partnership was born, and there were at least three circumstances. Number one, we had a process and a negotiation with Russia on the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. And we also had a process with our southern neighbors called the Union for Mediterranean. And we didn't have anything with the non-Russian eastern neighbors. And the idea was that it would be a bit like the Visegrad Group, namely, show us that you can be clubbable amongst yourselves, and then we will make a judgment whether you can become a member in future if you wish. And I think in those days the West had much greater soft power. We were, without a doubt, an example for others to follow. And now I'm afraid some of the processes in the partnership countries are in the right direction towards greater openness and perhaps greater control by citizens of their governments. And I'm not so sure inside the European Union and even the United States. So it's been a very mixed picture.
Okay, it's mixed, but are we, there's this supposedly Chinese curse saying, may you live in interesting times. And the Chinese, they deny that it's Chinese curse or proverb, but we use it quite often. Do you think that, it was an interesting time, but I think we are better off these days? Because, some people say, when you follow the discourse, in Poland, also in European politics, some people believe that, well, 10 years ago, the world was much better and was simpler. You mentioned the role of the West. We knew what was wrong, what was right. What is the, you said a mixed picture, but what is the nature of this mixed picture, just?
Well, we overcame the financial crisis, and we are, in fact, richer than we ever were before. But we've lost some of our self-confidence because our own systems have proven much more fragile than we anticipated, and we've lost the faith and the conviction. I think it's partly to do with the failure of the Arab Spring. It's partly to do with the migration crisis and the rise of populism. But the correlation of forces is not as favorable to us as it was then.
Thank you, Minister. And I now turn to Minister Bezhuashvili. Your assessment from Georgian point of view, that was a really interesting time for Georgia as well as for Ukraine, but then we go to Ukraine later. How do you see those last 10 years in Georgia and your international politics seen from a Georgian point of view?
First of all, congratulations to all graduates, and you are going to live in interesting times, certainly. And from my perspective, and looking back, what has changed, what has not. And Radek made a very good point that 2008 is not because I'm Georgian, but because it has changed many things. But on the other hand, after 2008, we have had the same situation in 2014 with Ukraine, when Russia did the same with the same scenario and with the same aggressiveness in 2008. So from this point of view, nothing has changed in the Russian attitude toward toward international community and their behavior. On the other hand, looking back to 2008, 2009, and since you mentioned the US in this context, in a broader picture, what we have got two administrations struggling to figure out how to deal with Russia. And starting 2009, 2010 with an attempt to push the reset button, failed. Then another administration trying to figure out how to find a modus vivendi with Russia. I think it's also failing because nothing is changing to my perspective. Europe now, 10 years, many things have changed. You see change in politics in the different countries, attitudes of voters. You have anti-establishment movements. You have a rise of populism, as Radek mentioned. It changes not only internal dynamics in those European countries, but also it changes European Union itself. And us as aspirant countries of the European Union, thanks to the really good format of Eastern Partnership that under the championship and leadership of Poland and Sweden and Radek and our good friend Carl Bildt created this framework for us to be closer to European Union, to fulfill our aspirations in a more efficient and speedy way. For us, these processes that are going on in European countries, in the European Union, are extremely important because our voters are also changing. And the processes that started in Central European countries, in Western European countries, are having a huge effect on the political processes in the countries in the neighborhood. So, just to make it short, 10 years of existence of Eastern Partnership and a bigger picture of a standoff of Russia, US, Europe, very aggressive attitude of Russia that hasn't changed, makes the next 10 years very challenging. And these challenges need to be tackled by those young politicians, political science specialists, academics, diplomats, public officials who are sitting in this room. And that creates a challenge for all of us.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Tarasyuk, I mean, what is your impression of the last 10 years? Are we better off, or did we use this time to improve the political and security situation in Europe?
It seemed to me that the last 10 years produced some unexpected results. And these unexpected results are being connected with Russia. And this night events in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe proved that we are witnessing the corrosion of European values among the European countries. Because, you know, this night the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, with 118 votes, decided to invite Russia back to the Parliamentary Assembly, despite of the fact that Russia did nothing to implement their commitments before the Council of Europe and other international documents. Well, the events in 2014 proved that Russia was not stopped in Georgia in 2008. As a result, Russia decided to attack Ukraine. We are in the 6th year of war with Russia, with the second largest military power in the world. And this aggression produced the results which were not expected by myself, because NATO did not react on Russian aggression in 2014 against Ukraine. So it even did not do what it did during the Russian aggression against Georgia. Here, of course, I mean not NATO as a whole, but the United States reaction was absolutely different, and I agree with President Trump, who is criticizing Obama for the aggressive policy of Russia. So because Obama administration did nothing to stop Russians in their aggressive adventures. In the European Union, we are witnessing, in addition to what Radek and Gela said, we are witnessing the process which are in the opposite direction of the European integration. So the Brexit is one of the problem. Let us hope it is going to be the last problem for the unity of the European Union. This year, we recently had the new elections to the European Parliament, and the correlation of forces in the European Parliament is going to be changed considerably, and there will be no majority composed of two major factions in the European Parliament, like European People's Party and the Social Democrats. So there will be no the end of the hegemony of these two major political forces in Europe. And I think that the Nord Stream project to bring more gas from Russia to Germany, so it is yet another proof that the European values are not the values anymore, that there is no such a common energy security policy as used to be, de facto, or proclaimed. So these are the processes which to my mind, are proving that we are in the worse situation now than 10 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I now like to dwell a bit on the Eastern Partnership and lessons learned, because we, at the beginning, I remember 2008 and then 2009, there are a lot of discussions about, and Mr. Sikorski mentioned that, the Mediterranean Union, Eastern Partnership, you know, the role of the Commission, which was not particularly keen on that idea at that time. But 10 years have passed. Technically, Eastern Partnership is about, association agreements and deep, comprehensive free trade areas. But we all know that it's not about technical issues, where it's the nature of the Eastern Partnership. It was supposed to bring us closer. us, EU, and the Eastern neighbors. So the question is, what have we learned about each other over the last 10 years? Because at the beginning, especially on the Polish side, there were huge expectations. Kind of partnership for peace. Veni, if we compare it to NATO, that this is just a stop. Eastern Partnership was an idea that was supposed to lead in some future to the full EU membership. It seems it didn't work out that way. We were not satisfied with the pace of and the speed of reforms in Eastern countries like Ukraine. On the other hand, we heard a lot of messages coming from both Tbilisi and also Kiev that without the membership perspective, this program doesn't have much sense. That that politically EU should be much more flexible. So what are the main lessons learned? What have we achieved, and where have we failed over the last 10 years, Minister?
I think we should measure the success of Eastern Partnership by appropriate metrics. And if you compare it to the Union for Mediterranean, it's an unbelievable success achieved with huge speed, because basically nothing has happened in the Union for Mediterranean in the last 15 years. Whereas with Eastern Partnership countries, we have deep and comprehensive free trade agreements with 3 of the 6. We have visa-free regimes with 3 of the 6. And remember, visa-free regimes means the transformation of the entire internal affairs segment of those states, because the conditions for getting visa-free agreement were very stringent. You had to have control over external borders, control over the passports issued, databases of passports issued, readmissions agreements, all kinds of stuff. So a very important section of the state activity of 3 countries has been Europeanized. And the deep and comprehensive free trade area sounds like just trade, but actually it's a transformation of the legal civilization of those countries. It means that when Georgia and Ukraine now consider a new law to pass, they take as their example the acquis communautaire and not Soviet law or Russian law. Huge. And let's remember how much money we've spent on the Eastern Partnership.
Did we? Because
yeah, I mean the budget is what, 1.5 billion per annum? I mean, let me tell you, when I was foreign minister, my entire budget for developmental assistance was 100 million zlotys per annum, which is about what, 20 million euros? And this is 1.5 billion. And this is on useful things like border management, so it's more civilized, cross-border environmental projects, tourism, small business, legal advice. Erasmus has been extended to young people from Eastern Partnership countries. We are planting seeds that will bring a rich harvest, and it's already bringing a rich harvest. I mean, places like Georgia and Ukraine, people now should at least have the sense that their national passport is more valuable than some other passports, right? That's not a small thing, that you can travel to the EU without a visa. And let's remember that half of those countries never had membership aspirations. So membership is not the correct yardstick, because the membership track is by its very nature individual. And Eastern Partnership could only help those countries that wished in future to become members to increase their chances of being ready. That was all that it could achieve. And you know, the fact that Eastern Partnership is the only format in which Armenia and Azerbaijan talk to each other is also not a small thing. So I think it's been a huge success, actually. And then, of course, you know, some hopes were not fulfilled. When I first met my colleague Frank-Walter Steinmeier in 2008 in Bydgoszcz, when he was first foreign minister, I said, look, Frank-Walter, we are realists. We are not these Polish romantics who take us for. You know, we don't imagine that membership for Ukraine will happen in the next 3 years. We think 2020 is a realistic perspective, which then seemed like a lifetime away. And he said, well, 2020, if the Ukrainians do whatever needs to do, that's doable. But of course, the Ukrainian state didn't do everything that should have been done. And so we have delays, and I fear that today's Poland has done a terrible disservice to our Eastern Partnership neighbors, because we have resurrected some of the bad stereotypes in Western Europe about Eastern Europe having different kinds of politics and having democracies that are less firmly grounded. And however unfair that may be, because of course we have these problems even in the United States, it means that they'll be even more reluctant than before to enlarge, particularly to enlarge to the east. They will make more trouble, and the criteria will be even higher. Because they couldn't imagine that once a country fulfills the Copenhagen criteria, like Poland, on the rule of law, it will then want of its own volition to slide back. But unfortunately it's happened, and they've internalized the lesson.
Thank you. Mr. Tarasyuk, I mean, what has Ukraine learned about Brussels and European Union over the last 10 years? Because, I mean, from both sides, there are some accusations about the speed of reforms, about some political decisions. What is your perspective from, so to speak, the other side?
Let me go beyond the 10 years mark to 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the European Union invented a new policy which was referred to as European neighborhood policy, which was conceptually absolutely wrong policy, and Ukraine didn't accept this policy because it embraced not only our countries of in Europe, but Northern Africa and Middle East. So this was conceptually wrong policy, and thanks to Radek and Carl Bildt, they corrected this wrong policy, conceptually wrong policy, with the European neighborhood policy, which was absolutely correct. And I think that this policy is much more of interest to Ukraine than the European neighborhood policy used to be. Indeed, Radek just referred to the successes of this policy. At the same time, what is the one major element which is missing in this policy from Brussels, and here I mean all countries of the European Union, the recognition of the future membership in the European Union. So I remember when Brussels promised to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and first of all Poland, the perspective of membership. So first the political decision was taken.
Actually, they didn't. All we had was a Polish declaration that we aspire to it. Technically speaking, Ukraine has more, because it has an EU declaration that the association agreement will not be the last step in relations. This was our one-sided declaration. We didn't have a promise.
Well, you have the promise, and this took place after the beginning of 90s. The frustration was so deep in Poland that President Wałęsa announced the possibility of creating NATO and EU BIS. This was a demonstration of frustration, that there was no answer from the European Union, from Brussels. But later, Brussels took a very correct position. It took a political decision that those countries, including Poland, will be members of the European Union. So until recently, there is no such clear perspective, neither for Ukraine nor for Georgia. Although our countries are aspiring to join the European Union. Of course, I should say frankly that Ukrainian authorities did not implement all which Brussels was and is expecting. But there is no perspective. The perspective of membership for all new EU member states became, a kind of instigation for the internal reforms, which is not the case with our countries. And I think that, the 2026-2027 will be a right time for the European Union to send the message to our countries. Why? Because this will be the time when Lithuania and Poland will chair the European Union, and this will be the right moment with these two friendly countries to insist on Brussels to send a clear message. So this is my vision.
Thank you. And Mr. Bezhuashvili, what is your take on the Eastern Partnership? Was it worth to open up your market, to introduce reforms, and to, without actually, having a clear prospect for the EU membership?
After quite a grey picture of world politics in our previous topic, we have a positive note now. The positive note is that, and I fully endorse what Radek and Borys have said about the positive impact of the Eastern Partnership on us, and I'm speaking on behalf of Georgia, but I also would say that the beneficiaries of this architecture that was created rightly 10 years ago, beneficiaries are equal inside the format but they are different. And this difference, as Radek said, is very natural. You know, we have Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova. They have expressed their aspiration for a membership. Azerbaijan and Armenia, they have their own way. And that's absolutely normal, and it's okay. It's up to the countries to decide upon their destiny. If they want eventually to be members, it's fine. If not, the format gives them unique and very good avenue to reform their systems, to reform their legislation, to reform their political systems. Just going back what Radek said, what the Eastern Partnership format gives us and these instruments, free trade agreement, visa-free regime, it is indeed has changed dramatically, for example, Georgian legal system from the point of view of protection of external borders. I remember my times when I was a minister in 2005, 2006, our argument in the European Parliament, in European Commission, at that time to receive visa facilitation. You see, we started visa facilitation. And visa facilitation was so toxic for European ministers, my colleagues, that some of them were telling me that, you know, Minister, we cannot do that because it smells membership. That's I remember vividly. And now we're talking about free visa regime for 3 countries out of the partnership, getting stronger by being able to control their external borders. My argument 15 years ago was, give us a chance to be the gateway for you on your external borders. Give us a chance. And now chance is here, there. And as an output of this, European Union is better off. European Union external borders are better protected than without visa regimes of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. And hopefully the Armenia and Azerbaijan will join one day as well. So we have a very positive note, very positive examples how the very heavy, sometimes not flexible European Union bureaucracy can work. And the Eastern Partnership format and framework gives a very, very good, effective example. This is very rare when the representatives from the Eastern Partnership countries are speaking highly and positively about deliverables from the European Union. And that's exactly the case.
Thank you. Minister, you would like to respond to that?
Just one footnote before we go further, to correct a myth that is being spread about Eastern Partnership, namely that it was some kind of anti-Russian plot. It really wasn't, because at the time when we devised Eastern Partnership, Russia was more advanced in its relations with the European Union. We were negotiating a PCA2 agreement with Russia, for which there was already a mandate from the European Commission. And Russia was welcome to join the EU neighborhood policy and Eastern Partnership. It was Russia that decided that she is too important for that, therefore a separate track, therefore PCA2, which was very advanced. And it was Russia that decided round about 2010 that she would create a rival, a pole of integration. And that's why then she started to treat Eastern Partnership as a problem. But it wasn't so at the beginning. And also let's remember that President Putin is on the record, publicly stating at a press conference with Jose Manuel Barroso in 2008, that he doesn't mind Ukraine joining the European Union. He only minds NATO. But economic integration, no problem. Go ahead.
He didn't know what he was saying, apparently.
What?
He didn't know what he was saying. Apparently.
Maybe, but the point is, Russia changed its mind, not we.
But thank you very much for bringing up this, because I wanted to play a bit of a devil's advocate. Well, when you go farther to the west, I mean, it's not so rare when you can meet people actually arguing that the Eastern Partnership have effectively destabilized the eastern neighborhood of Europe. First, we have war in Ukraine, Crimea annexation, then we have a lot of social upheavals, problems with economy, now we have Russian pressure on Belarus. And you mentioned passports, but one of the side effects of visa liberalization, when you take Moldova, it's a good case. You see young people basically living in the country. Yes, also in Ukraine, Ukraine government have a problem with brain drain. We are profiting very much from this here in Poland, but from the Ukrainian point of view, it's not good if you would like just to reform your economy. So what would you respond, Minister, to those claims actually that as long as there was no Eastern Partnership, the world was simple and much safer in terms that there was the EU and there was the Russia and there was some sorts of cooperation not to cross those red lines. And now after 10 years, Eastern Europe looks pretty much different.
Well, first of all, Moldovans, for example, were working abroad in huge numbers way before they got visa-free regime with the European Union. They were going mainly to Russia. And when they were coming to the EU, they did come, but they worked illegally. Just like there was 500,000 Poles in Britain already when Tony Blair dropped the protection of the British labour market, it's that 500,000 people could then start paying taxes. And then some more came, obviously. But no, the reason Crimea was taken was that the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, destroyed Ukraine's army. Whole tank divisions existed only as bank accounts from which the generals were stealing the money. If Ukraine in the military sphere was a functional state willing to fight, I don't think Putin would have done it. So I don't think it's, an Eastern Partnership had absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, you could argue the opposite. It was at the Eastern Partnership 2013 Vilnius summit that Yanukovych made the wrong decision for himself and for his country. He refused to sign and then went back to Kiev and immediately the next day he had the beginnings of Maidan. Yes. Right. So had he signed, there would not have been the Maidan. And without Maidan and the disorderly escape of Yanukovych from Ukraine, there wouldn't have been Crimea. So actually Ukraine fell victim to its indecisiveness. Ukraine actually, I think, overplayed its importance because it's a large country and it was dealing with the Russians, with the Americans, with the Germans, with Poland, with the EU, thinking that it was playing some kind of grand geopolitical game, whereas in fact you were just wasting time, not carrying out reforms. Had you carried out reforms consistently for the last 20 years, you would not have lost Crimea, and you would be much further advanced in your membership ambitions. And those ambitions, to my mind, will only be fulfilled if you complete your transformation. I think Petro Poroshenko made another mistake, not as dramatic as Yanukovych, but he failed to de-oligarchize. Is that a word? No, it's not. But anyway,
it exists.
It doesn't. The problem with Ukraine, to my mind, is that your social structure is much more reminiscent of Russia than of Ukraine. The country is owned by about 50 guys. And that's not how that's not how it should be in a competitive free market system. And until you deal with that, you will not have a stable basis for democracy.
Minister Tarasyuk, as far as I remember, the discussion in Ukraine at that time, the idea was simply to expand politically, economically, to have access to EU market, also to Russian market. Things went as they, basically did, and now you see that EU is the first trading partner of Ukraine. But the cost of that shift was actually, the loss of the access to the Russian market. Yes, what are the costs of the way in which the history in the Eastern Partnership evolved to Ukraine? Because we focus, and it's natural that we focus on achievements, successes, but on the other hand, there is some reality on the ground, and we cannot deny simply that there was some price to be paid, and Ukraine still is paying this price when it comes in its economy, when gas issues. Yes, again, I mean, this is a never-ending story. I mean, what is the how can we get out of this vicious circle of Ukraine being torn between, on one hand, Russia, on the other hand, EU? Where do we go?
Well, I would say that Ukraine was trying for many years consistently to become closer to the European Union. And long ago, we have established membership in the European Union and NATO as our objective, as foreign policy objectives. But at the same time, the situation in Ukraine, because of the changing of the political elites, might be portrayed as graphically as a sinusoid, ups and downs. The greatest down was during Yanukovych time, whom I agree with Radek. He was purely a pro-Russian politician who destroyed Ukraine from within, and this concerned not only the armed forces. Also, I would like to say that there were a lot of optimism after the victory of democracy in Ukraine during the Orange Revolution of 2004 and with the election of Viktor Yushchenko. But those expectations were not implemented because of Yushchenko, who in fact led to power pro-Russian President Yanukovych. So I remember in 2006, myself as a foreign minister, I negotiated the membership action plan with the leadership of NATO. And there was an agreement in principle that Ukraine will be provided with membership action plan autumn 2006. But what happened? The internal changes led to power Yanukovych. Yanukovych, as a prime minister, made a trip to Brussels on, it seemed to me, 14th September 2006, and he declared before the North Atlantic Council that Ukrainians are not ready for the membership action plan. So obviously this was the signal from Putin, and he was implementing what Putin said to him. The similar picture has taken place in 2013, November, during the Vilnius EU and Eastern Partnership Summit, when Yanukovych refused to sign the agreement. I was at that time in this meeting as Euronest Parliamentary Assembly co-president, and I saw with my own eyes what happened. All of the participants were waiting for Yanukovych for just half an hour, and he didn't appear. His members of the team were assuring the EU officials that he is going to sign the agreement. But then he came later and said, sorry, I'm not going to sign the agreement. So this was obviously the pressure from Moscow, during which Putin was pressing him not to sign the association agreement. So that's how, those anti-Ukrainian forces destroyed the strategic objective of Ukraine. So Yushchenko failed to produce the result. So Poroshenko was, saying something in Brussels and other major capitals, but doing opposite inside of the country. So he proclaimed his fight against oligarchy, but he led oligarchy system. He made, irony from the existence of anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine. So they were fighting each other instead of fighting corruption in Ukraine. So this led to the disillusionment and unacceptance of the institutions among the Ukrainians, as a result of which 73.4% of them voted against the institutions they saw, and they supported an absolutely new person, a showman, Zelensky. Zelensky is just beginning, but the forces which were led by Poroshenko are preventing him in the parliament from taking decisions, any decision. So that's why it was inevitable for him to announce early parliamentary elections, which will take place 21st July this year. And I may predict that in the parliament we will have, as a result of these early parliamentary elections, the clear party of Zelensky majority, if not, well, the one-party majority, but at least it will be 2-3 parties like-minded, and this will open the new opportunity for real fundamental changes and reforms in Ukraine. Let's hope it will be the case.
Thank you, Minister. No, Minister Bezhuashvili, I mean, Georgia has always been a kind of a Muster example, Musterknabe, as Germans say, when it comes to reforms, also the pace of implementation of the CFTA association agreement. But how shall we, I mean, what can be done, or what can we do, I mean, you and EU, to sustain the moment? Because some people say that, okay, we got this AA, the CFTA, visa regime liberalization, but we all know that politics cannot tolerate a vacuum, that there is always a need for new ideas. So if the EU membership is not on the agenda, how can we sustain the moment with the EEP so Georgia is still thinking about the EU as its strategic choice? Because as we all know, and we discussed before, there is nothing we can take for granted these days, yes? I mean, the fact that we got an association agreement, the CFTA, does not exclude in some years, some upheavals which will undo all the things which we achieved.
Yes, indeed, and I would agree with this statement that that Boris made, that membership perspective is very important. But it's not only the things that we as aspirant countries are asking. Clearly, the homework is on us. Clearly, deliverables needs to be on us. But the membership perspective for those countries who want it, not automatically to everybody, is an important signal to our societies that are struggling. The societies in Ukraine and in Georgia, they are struggling. They are struggling with reforms. Reforms are not easy. The reforms are not easy to conduct and are not easy to observe by people. We have had this experience, and we are still having this experience. But just for a moment, I would like to go back to your devil's advocacy and how our opponents are compromising our success. And in my experience, I think in our joint experience, our opponents, in this case Russia, is an opponent, to put it very diplomatically. We have learned that they have two ways of killing your success. If they see that you have a weakness, they play on it, and they will not lose a chance to play on your weaknesses. That's what we learned. And that's what happened, playing on weaknesses of Ukraine, as Radek said, destroyed military power, destroyed institutions intentionally for the last 20 years. The same in Georgia. They will see weakness, they will play on it. But if they see your strength and your success, they will shoot it. They will shoot at it by compromising it with linking with some other things that are logically not linkable. For example, if you have democracy flourishing in your country and you have a legitimate, for example, social protest and unrest, their propaganda goes against and saying, this is a result of your democracy. That's how people are struggling, and they are trying to sell this as a result of your development. So that's what we have been witnessing. That's what is happening. This is some of the lessons we have learned. Unfortunately, these lessons are not learned well enough in Western Europe. Still, there is attempts, and this is a clear example of appeasement, is this morning vote in Council of Europe Assembly. It is an appeasement. And we should learn that appeasement is not a key to negotiate with Russia. It always have repercussions, it always have a negative effect. Let's then very shortly tell you what Georgia's perspectives are. Clearly we need a membership perspective. Clearly we need some indication that it is going to happen sooner or later. I would say that 2008 Bucharest summit, and here is my bridging with NATO process. In Bucharest summit, our estimate was that we would get a membership action plan. It didn't happen, but what happened was a very important promise from NATO that Georgia will one day become a member.
Georgia and Ukraine.
In Ukraine, yes. That promise still is being debated, but that promise has been repeated in all summit declarations since, which gives us a hope. And you see, I do believe in this, we started with Chinese wisdom, but the wisdom is that yesterday is a yesterday. Our life is today, and tomorrow is just a hope. So the hope is important for you to perform. But having said this, the internal agenda of Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and all the countries in the Eastern Partnership needs to be done by our own governments, by our own forces. We need to mobilize resources inside. We need to focus on our reforms, because nobody else will do it for us. There are a lot of obstacles outside, a lot of opponents who will be opposing our success. And the only thing I would wish that we use still, and here is the point, we use still existing framework of Eastern Partnership. I do not see, and it's my personal view, that you need to change it or upgrade it. It's all on the members now. What we need to sustain the framework. We need to focus on our reforms and having the same level of engagement as we have had so far.
Thank you, Minister. It reminded me about some theory about EU enlargement, NATO enlargement to Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, that actually we were not invited, but we invited ourselves, yes, being so persistent with our policies. But Minister Sikorski, I mean, on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, just you start your term in the European Parliament. What would be how would you try to, how would you explain and try to build a new momentum around the Eastern Partnership in the European Parliament? How can we go further, knowing that there is enlargement fatigue, that enlargement, at least from the point of view of many Western countries, is absolutely not on the agenda? How can we go further actually without undermining this program? Should we think about some form of a differentiated membership along the lines we have differentiated integration? Should we focus on more money coming for infrastructure? I mean, what would be your idea? How can we sustain this momentum and not to lose everything we achieved?
Even if the European Commission certified that you've met all the criteria, and even if the European Parliament voted that you should be admitted, I don't see that a treaty could be ratified in the member states for the next 10 years of any eastward enlargement. Maybe somewhere in the Balkans, because that's regarded as unfinished business, and that's not being challenged as directly. But the fact of the matter is that the pernicious methods that the Russian Federation uses to undermine Western democracies and Eastern democracies, unfortunately, work. And the Westerners have no appetite for confronting Russia, because from their point of view, they are secure and prosperous. And we are the landmine, we are the buffer. And therefore, I think membership in either NATO or the European Union for the next decade will not happen. And with NATO, in fact, you should think twice about accepting security guarantees that cannot be fulfilled. It was all very well as long as the insurance policy was being written in the secure knowledge that it will not be called upon. But look, Poland has been a member of NATO for 20 years now, and it's only now that there is some semblance of military presence that reassures us and that deters. With Ukraine and Georgia, there is neither the political will nor the logistical capability to come to your assistance. And there is nothing more dangerous in international relations than a non-credible security guarantee, because it makes those exposed to it braver than you should be.
But how do we know whether it's credible or not?
It is not credible, because if you give a security, what does it mean to give a security guarantee? Let's be brutally honest about it. You know, I was nominated as one of the world's 100 policy intellectuals for telling the truth even when it's undiplomatic. Okay? A security guarantee means that you're willing to go to war in defense of that country. Well, the West is not willing to go to war with Russia in defense of either Ukraine or Georgia.
It's the West, including the United States? Or?
Particularly the United States, I would think. Also, Georgia, as you learned to your cost in 2008, is almost impossible to reinforce, either because of the Montreux Convention and access to the Black Sea, or otherwise. And if you're not willing to go to war and win it, you shouldn't extend a security guarantee. Coming back to the European Union, if I'm right, then we need a new mechanism for very close partner countries that are not going to be members. And we don't need it for Eastern Partnership, we need it for countries like Turkey and the United Kingdom. Because Britain will, we don't know. I mean, the joke in Brussels is that Britain will leave when Turkey joins. But you can't exclude the possibility that they will leave. But if they leave, we still need them as close partners, particularly in the security field. And so I think that if that happens, there will be a stronger case for making a sort of inner-outer core of serious, important countries that are not members but should be close allies of the European Union.
Well, the thing is that if the UK, if there is a no-deal Brexit, actually, Ukraine and Georgia would have a higher status vis-à-vis EU institutions with the CFTA and association agreement, actually.
Well, Britain can, of course, immediately apply to join.
Yes.
And be a candidate country.
Minister Tarasyuk, I mean, you've heard that, well, in next 10 years, I mean, EU enlargement is not going to happen. So how you believe you can sustain a moment of, for European politics in Ukraine, a country which is a very lively country? We have now a brand new situation with a new president. We'll see how the parliamentary elections will go. But how can you, you're Ukrainian politicians and you know many people in Ukrainian politics. How would you try to convince them that EU and that association agreement, the CFTA, with all the cost it takes on the Ukrainian side, that it's worth doing, that you still should go the same way, knowing that, well, the EU membership is not in the agenda in the next 10 years, if Minister Sikorski is right, of course.
I'm not that pessimistic as Minister Sikorski. As I said, the years 2025-27 will be the moment when the European Union, inshallah, will reconsider its policy. But I agree with both Radek and Gela that the key for the success is in our countries. So, and if there will be an understanding, and I hope it will be the case with the new president, the new parliament, and the new government, that it is absolutely necessary to conduct real, deep, comprehensive and systemic reforms. And with the success of these reforms, I think that we will, approach the situation in which the European Union may consider that Ukraine and Georgia will meet the criteria. So I think that the European Union membership is not per se a final objective. The final objective is to improve the life of ordinary Ukrainians and Georgians and Moldovans, to bring it to the standards which do exist in the countries of the European Union. So this should be the ultimate objective, and not just a membership as such. So finally, if we will, reach this situation, the issue of membership in the European Union probably will not be that demanding in the Ukrainian society. Because the society, people are caring about their day-to-day life, not about the membership. Although the perspective of membership in the European Union is very high in Ukraine, as well as Putin helped to create this majority for the membership in NATO, which was not the case before the war. So now the Ukrainian society is more pro-EU and more pro-NATO. So the question mark is only the political elite, whether it is capable to implement these expectations of the people and hope of the people or not. I'm more optimistic as to the new authorities coming to power, that they will produce, finally the results in reforming Ukraine.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just at bottom, of course, technically speaking, there are two ways of equalizing standards between Ukraine and the EU. One is for Ukraine to rise up to EU standards,
yes,
but the other one is to lower the EU standards to Ukraine's level. And some people, including in this country, are working very hard to achieve that.
I want to say on that happy note, but I will not say it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I now would like to open the debate to the audience. If you have any questions, remarks, okay, I see the hand. Do we have a mic? Yes. Okay, and please introduce yourself, okay? Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Jana, I come from Ukraine, and I actually had a bit challenging question which relates to your last remark, Minister Sikorski. So it's about the role of Poland actually as an advocate of Ukraine's interests on the international level and especially on the EU level, because it seems that Poland is a bit losing its role. And this is first of all because of some tensions on the line between Warsaw and Brussels, and also it's about some tensions which are taking place on the line between Kiev and Warsaw, right? The bilateral relations which are not going through the best, let's say, period now. And yeah, this was my question actually. Do you think that Poland today is still keeping up with its role as the advocate of Ukraine's interests? Is it losing its role, or has it already lost its role? And I would love to hear both from Minister Sikorski and from Minister Tarasyuk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions at this moment? Yes, please. So we collect three, and this guy over here. Yeah?
Good morning. My name is Rado. I come from Moldova. Thank you very much to all of you. My question will be related to the future, because we talked a lot about the past 10 years, but also we need to reflect on the future of this partnership. And I have the question connected practically with the proposal of the current Foreign Minister of Poland, Mr. Czaputowicz, to institutionalize the Eastern Partnership, to create a secretariat. How do you see it as a feasible project? And how would you say possible to happen this? Because we know that the European member states have different attitude to this partnership and different commitment in comparison with Visegrad Group, which have a different commitment in comparison with the others. So I would like to see what is your thought on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last question in this round, the gentleman on right. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Otari, I come from Georgia. I will have a question to Mr. Bezhuashvili on current tensions in Georgian politics. As we all know, a couple of days ago, a Russian member of Russian Duma visited the Georgian parliament, and it caused tension in Georgian politics. And nowadays we have put demonstration in front of Georgian parliament, and it's still ongoing. How do you think, how can it affect on future on EU-Georgian relations, this Georgian politics towards Russia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have 3 questions for now. One on Georgia, one on the idea to institutionalize the Eastern Partnership, and the third one, and the bigger one, I guess, about the what's up between Ukraine and Poland. Just who would like to start? Yeah.
Look, on institutionalization of the Eastern Partnership. It's my personal view, but I don't think that institutionalization or creating another European bureaucracy is necessary. I'm a profound believer in less democracy, more efficient democracy, small government. This is my belief. I think that the results are positive. I mean, we all 3 agree that the Eastern Partnership design and architecture worked. We acknowledge it, and I think we don't need any other mechanisms or institutions to solidify it. We just need to continue with the pace of reforms. We need to continue with the same format. That's, I think, would be the best option. As far as Georgia is concerned and the recent events, well, I would not dramatize it. The theme of the protests is very simple, and it's not new. The Georgian territory is occupied by Russia, and the people of Georgia have a legitimate, continuous protest against this. These events just were triggered by, I think, some mistakes that the government or parliament, whoever it is, just made. But otherwise, it is just democracy in action. I mean, there is a legitimate protest of people, and it has nothing to do with the Eastern Partnership or European perspective. In opposite, I think that maturing process of democracy in Georgia is extremely important for us to be aspirant country. We need to learn how to govern. We need to learn how to govern ourselves. We need to learn how to deliver results to our people, and I think the Eastern Partnership framework gives you a lot of tools and avenues to do it. You just need to do it effectively and use these mechanisms. And again, going back to the paradigm of Russian propaganda, they will be playing on every weakness, on every and will shooting every success on us. We need to be ready for it and not give them a chance to counterfeit this, fake news in their propaganda. We are not good at this. And I think not only us, but many other countries are not good at this, much more powerful than Georgia. So I would not dramatize the situation in Georgia. The political process goes on there. I think there will be a chance for a profound political reform as an outcome of these protests. And I hope that this political reform will happen, that will make stronger our democracy, that will make stronger the case of effectiveness of Eastern Partnership that produced results in our country.
Thank you, Minister.
I agree on the Secretariat. I think it would actually be harmful if there was a Secretariat outside of the Commission, if that's what you mean. We need those people working inside the Commission because then they are more effective. And last I checked, there was a team, whatever it's called, inside the the Commission working with Eastern Partnership as its task. What I think would help is if member states started respecting the Lisbon Treaty and allowed the High Representative for Foreign Security Policy to do her job. The reason we made we created that office was that the methods hitherto of the EU and member states conducting foreign policy in parallel wasn't working. And it's still not working because member states are not doing what they pledged themselves to do. And more than that, we made the High Rep a deputy president of the Commission. And she or he in future should be given a cluster of directors, of direct DGs and commissioners to work with so that the strategic vision can be implemented through the work of the relevant commissioners. The enlargement, development, humanitarian, hopefully in future defense, and then it would have a chance of success. As regards Poland's role with Ukraine, and Borys, you tell me, but my impression is that that role has ended. And it's ended because, first of all, we have a team in Poland that doesn't really do foreign policy. It does internal politics at the expense of foreign policy. So for them, mobilizing their hardcore electorate on the basis of anti-Ukrainian sentiments is more important than Poland's strategic interest in having Ukraine as a good friend. And also, there is an old debate in Poland, what's more important, whether to be firmly anchored in the West or to be a kind of Prometheus in the East. And the case, and the question you've asked, answers perfectly why the two are inextricably linked. When Poland is influential in the West, she can do something for Ukraine. What does Ukraine want from us? Ukraine wants from us to have influence over the rest of the EU to speed up Ukraine's membership. And when we were in good standing in the European Union, when we were the presidency of the European Union, we were able to close the text of the association agreement in 2011 because people trusted that Poland knew what it was doing. And we were seen as up-and-coming members of the five and six most important countries in the EU. When Poland is isolated in the EU, it can also do nothing for Ukraine. And then Ukraine, of course, looks for other patrons. And you can't blame Ukraine for doing so. So if you are... so I'm afraid we've taken the wrong turn, both in the West and in the East, which is unfortunate.
Thank you. Minister Tarasyuk.
I agree and disagree with Radek. I don't think that the role of Ukraine's advocate has ended. It diminished considerably. And the current Polish authorities found themselves a hostage of their internal politics, as a result of which they spoiled the relationship with Ukraine. And this is the only responsibility of these current authorities in Poland, not in Ukraine. Because they were trying to impose on us the interpretation of our common history. You cannot succeed in, imposing on somebody, some country, your own interpretation of the history. So this is what happened in Ukrainian-Polish relationship since 2016. And I agree with Radek that the weaker influence of Poland in the European Union, the less Poland can do for Ukraine. So this is not the time now to speak about Polish advocacy for Ukraine. It is rather Lithuania which assumed this role from Poland. Currently, Lithuania is doing most to be the advocate of Ukraine. So I think that the period in which Poland diminished its influence and authority in the EU institutions is not the best time for Poland to serve as an advocate of any country, including Ukraine.
Nationalism hurts the nation, you see.
That was the part you agreed. What was the part you disagreed with? Because you said Minister, that you
the
said
party
yourself
in
that
Poland. The party in Poland.
No, you said yourself that you do agree and disagree with Minister Sikorski. So my question is, what is the part where you
disagree on the advocacy role. Role of advocate has ended.
Okay,
I think that this role has diminished. But in the rest, I agree with Radek.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Just to add, in continuation what we were talking about, the Eastern Partnership institutionalization, what we definitely need is a championship of those countries who constructed this Eastern Partnership framework to continue their leadership. Because again, this is might be a compliment, but you know, at that time, two visionary people, Radek and Carl Bildt, being a foreign minister of that country, of their respective country, they took a leadership in pushing this forward. But now it's even more important to continue the leadership and championship of this. And I wish that Poland and Sweden will continue the sponsorship, leadership of this framework. And other countries should also join this because it would be very difficult, even if a commission effectively does a job, it's still a bureaucracy, and European bureaucracy, and you need a member state championship this process.
I'd just like to say something positive. At the time,
we're very positive, Minister.
At the time when I was proposing Eastern Partnership, the then opposition party was denouncing it as a traitorous realization of German intrigues in the East, and now they take credit for it. So something has happened. Something positive has happened.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, lady here.
Hello, my name is Agnieszka. I'm from Poland. Thank you very much for this debate. I have a question to both Mr. Bezhuashvili and Mr. Tarasyuk. So we've talked a lot about the reforms that are needed in order to potentially in the future receive a membership perspective. But I guess the elephant in the room is also the question of the unresolved conflicts and the fact that without a resolution, it will be very difficult for the EU to commit to accept your countries as members. So my question is, what would be, on the one hand, your expectations towards the EU? What should be the EU's attitude towards it if at some point your countries reach a level where your reforms have been achieved, but the conflicts are still there? What are your expectations at that point? On the other hand, what would you say your countries should do or should be prepared to change in their attitude in case those conflicts are not resolved, but you would really like to progress and join the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other? Okay. Please.
I'm Anna from Armenia, and I would love to know the opinion of Mr. Sikorski about the role of Armenia between EU and Eurasian Custom Union.
Thank you. And I saw the hand over here.
Hello, my name is Vera. I'm from Ukraine, and my question to Mr. Sikorski. You were talking a lot about European values, and in this challenging time when Poland and Hungary are participating in Article 7 process of breaching rule of law, and also in 2007 cooperation and verification mechanism was launched for Romania and Bulgaria to assess the implementation of all European values in countries. Should the same, or as some researchers, for example, Dmitry Kochonov, our former visiting professor of the College of Europe, assumed to have, for example, a Copenhagen Commission to assess the implementation of Copenhagen criteria in countries. Should the same mechanism or the similar mechanism be implemented for the Eastern Partnership countries in future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No, I see. So we have a question on unresolved conflicts, Armenia, yes, and the values. Minister, you would like to start?
That's a great question, because hitherto the mechanism was that you proved that you were in compliance, and then you become a member, you have your veto, and that's it, you can do whatever you want. Which is why yesterday's judgment by the European Court of Justice could be the most significant thing that has happened in this area in a decade. Because it concerned a relatively new member state, and a member state being suspected of, correctly in my view, of breaching the rule of law, the ECJ has done something unprecedented. You could argue that the ECJ announced itself yesterday to be Europe's constitutional court, because it has passed a judgment on the agreement with our own constitution of this supposed judicial reform, which was actually an attempt at party takeover of the judicial system. This potentially creates the mechanism that you're talking about, I think. And I think it would be a good development, because the European Union can only work if relevant institutions in all the member states trust one another. And who else can make a judgment whether they're in compliance but the ECJ? So I think it's a good development. It's a federalist development. And I don't think our current government in Poland intended that. But it's not the first thing that they haven't anticipated. And I think that may also be good for the prospects of enlargement, because if we do have a mechanism of judging members, and it shouldn't be just Poland or Hungary, it should be everybody, of course, then the threshold of acceptance is somewhat lower. What were the other questions?
The other questions were on unresolved conflicts.
I think, because we don't have one, let me help our friends here. I think it would be completely unfair to prevent countries from joining because somebody else made an act of aggression against them. Because then you would be giving Russia veto power on who may or may not join the European Union. And we, for better and for worse, we already have a precedent. When the EU judged that the Greek community did the right thing in the Cyprus peace process, we accepted Cyprus, even though it, of course, has a territorial dispute with Turkey. So I think the requirement has to be that it can't be the fault of the candidate, but it shouldn't exclude people.
Thank you. On Armenia, or I don't know.
Just to continue what Radek said, and I endorse this. You know, we don't have and this question is like a $1 billion question. You know, we don't know the recipe how to get the membership and with the existing conflicts, because they are imposed on us. You know, and but I clearly see that we need to do what we're supposed to do. We need to reform our societies. We need to build a prosperous society. We need to build a country that will be exemplary. But on the other hand, we need to resist the Russian propaganda. We need to remind the world, remind the international community, in Russian society itself, that they are occupying nation of neighboring country. I mean, we need to do it in a parallel of successfully building our societies, economies, more secure the environment for our people, but at the same time, reminding and putting Russia on a hotspot every time we can for them to feel responsible. That needs to be done in a parallel, consistently. The consistency is a key, because we must be consistent in order to get the result. But there is and I agree, with the link of conflict, that you will play the card of Russia saying, Do you want to get a trouble, accepting Russia and Georgia and Ukraine into your club? You know, go ahead. So, difficult question, not impossible task. Again, it depends on us and mobilization of international community to achieve one day our goal. And you know, there is a saying, there is a saying that what's the difference between optimist and pessimist? We were talking about the pessimism, and I said, you know, the pessimist is an informed optimist. So yeah, and I
know a different definition.
You do?
Yeah, a pessimist thinks that things can't get any worse, and an optimist thinks that they can.
They can, right? Yeah, they can be this way too. But you know, there is a good saying within a cycle of lawyers, and I'm a lawyer myself. We're always cautiously optimistic, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the prospect of Georgia and Ukraine, with all the understanding of realpolitik that Radek explained and described to us. Cautiously optimistic I am, and I think there is a way for both Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and those countries who want to be in the organization one day, that they will come.
We didn't answer the Armenian question,
yeah.
which I think is quite simple. As far as I know, you cannot be in two customs unions at the same time. You have to impose somebody's external tariff. And as the British are finding out, you can be in one or the other, which of course is very uncomfortable for Armenia, because your sentiments are in one place and your security is in another. So you have a dilemma.
Thank you. And the last word goes to Mr. Tarasyuk.
Well, about unresolved conflicts, usually I'm trying to be very clear about the terminology. The right terminology of these conflicts is either frozen conflicts or protracted conflicts. So we had these conflicts over occupied territory of Abkhazia, of Georgia and Abkhazia and Southern Ossetia. We have Nagorno-Karabakh. Under the influence of Russia, Armenia is keeping a part of Azerbaijani territory. We have Transnistria, where Russians are controlling the situation. And now we have the Russian occupation of the Crimea and part of Donbass. So these are the examples of the policy Russia is conducting since the time of the disruption of the former Soviet Union. The purpose of this policy is clear: to prevent countries which are subject of their subversive activities or aggression from being successful, from being democratic and successful. So this is what Russia is trying to create. And it would be a mistake not to notice this Russian subversive activities, to use protracted conflicts in their merits. So, to my mind, with Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2014, NATO and major NATO capitals were caught by surprise and were puzzled. They didn't know what to do. And this, situation lasted until the NATO summit in Warsaw. So this is the clear indication that the West in general and NATO in particular is very vulnerable. So the collective fear of aggressive Russia is producing no visible result. It only instigates Russia to be more and more aggressive because of the lack of resolute response. So, to give Russia the arguments to influence somebody's policy, this is a policy of failure, both for NATO and the European Union. Talking about Russia and the European values Ira just said, I referred to already that this night was the vivid example of the failure of European values and principles. Because, here, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe demonstrated its inability to resist Russia, to contain Russia. So, as a result, Russia will retain probably today to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, and will continue their cynical rhetorics about their role, and they will remind you very many times in future, look, we overplayed you with your values and principles, and we will continue doing so. So these are my last remarks.
At the same time, the EU did extend sanctions on Russia, which I think is, whose implementation in the first place was a big surprise for President Putin, because he thought he had some EU countries in his pocket, and then it turned out that he didn't.
Yeah, but Putin continued to pretend that sanctions do not hurt Russia, but it did. It does. At the same time, my personal view is that the current policy of sanctions is not sufficient. The only non-military sanction the democratic world can impose on Russia is the isolation of Russia from SWIFT system, that is, from global financial and banking system. So this is the only painful means, non-military means, which may be applied against aggressive Russia.
Okay, that would be tough, but
I think that would be very tough and probably undoable. What we should do, in my judgment, is to clean up our own act. There is no reason, no legal reason, for us to be tolerating this system of offshore companies and bank accounts where apparently $30 trillion is being kept. So far as I can tell, the only reason to have an account in a tax haven is either to hide your money or to avoid paying tax. And that's the system which Russia is using to corrupt our own democracy. And if we passed laws saying it's a criminal offense for EU citizens and for EU companies to hold accounts in certain jurisdictions, including, I'm afraid, inside the European Union and in the United States, we could clean this up, and the opportunities for all kinds of oligarchs and kleptocrats and dictators to destroy our system would be much less.
well, I see that discussion
To
develop.
continue with, I would like to say that together with my colleagues from the Foreign Affairs Committee of Ukrainian Parliament, we last week visited Washington. We had a lot of meetings in the Congress, in the House, in the Senate, State Department, Pentagon, NSC, and we are happy to say that currently the US congressmen are considering the new resolution which implies the imposition of sanctions against any company in the world which is helping to construct Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So this is going to be, in case of the positive vote, the time when anybody who is against this, who is violating the sanctions, will be punished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ministers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and join me please to thank our ministers for an excellent debate. Thank you. I guess now it's time for coffee.
Ladies and gentlemen, thus ends our Natolin graduation debate. Now, as Director for Strategy of the Natolin campus, it's my great pleasure to be your guide for the rest of today's graduation day. In just, about 30 minutes, we will be starting the graduation closing ceremony, which will take place in the garden just by the palace. You'll see where that is. But to speed you on your way, you'll find in the quadrangle, just by the restaurant and the library, some refreshments. But if you could start making your way there and be in your seats by 12:15 sharp. Thank you very much.